Hello and welcome to the Macon Atlanta podcast. I'm your host, Brent Macon. We're talking to inspiring Atlantans about big questions, bold ideas, and better living. Our guest today is Chris Appleton. He's the founder and CEO of Art Pharmacy, a healthcare technology company solving America's mental health crisis. Art Pharmacy enables social prescribing of arts and culture-based programs as a way to boost quality of life. We cover what is social prescribing, what is the minimum effective dose of an arts and culture intervention, and how can the arts be a tool to combat loneliness and promote well-being. Chris is doing really interesting stuff in the Atlanta community and now nationwide, and I'm thrilled to share this conversation with you. So thank you, Chris, for the time. Without further ado, enjoy the Macon Atlanta conversation with Chris Appleton. Chris, thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time.
Brent, thanks for having me.
Can you tell me what Art Pharmacy is and how did you get here?
Art Pharmacy, I can tell you that. I can definitely tell you that.
Imagine you've said it once or twice at this point.
Art Pharmacy is a healthcare services company. We are based in Atlanta. We work nationally. And Art Pharmacy works with health systems, healthcare providers, community organizations like your local museum or theater, to enable doctors and other healthcare providers to prescribe participation in arts and culture activities for individuals with mental health concerns that are experiencing social isolation or loneliness, chronic diseases like diabetes and hypertension. Probably, like more simply said, it's exactly what it sounds like. We fill Art Pharmacy fills prescriptions for art and culture.
I have a bunch of follow-up questions that obviously we'll get to, both about how we got here as a country and then what social prescribing is and kind of how you all do that. What about your journey? Like, how did this rise to the top of being the thing that you're focusing on and spending your energy?
Yeah. 20 years ago, actually nearly exactly 20 years ago, next month, two friends and I started a nonprofit arts organization when we were in college. It was like a fun college project and it went on to become a thing. And I ran it for 15 years from 2004 to 2019. And amongst the many things that organization did, we were really interested in this sort of arts integration, cross-sector arts collaboration, which is just jargon for how do you make arts and culture a part of other industries or other verticals? Like, how do you incorporate the arts into other parts of life or business or whatever it may be? And through that work was introduced to the arts and medicine and arts and health fields. 2019, 2020 got interested in the research that is really clear that arts participation can improve people's health outcomes. There are centers for arts and health and arts and medicine at Harvard and Duke and Johns Hopkins and UCLA and the University of Florida and Northwestern University and the World Health Organization, like all over the globe for about 40 years. The arts and health research field has existed. And it was odd to me that the US healthcare system had not incorporated the arts at scale. It's like there's this clear intervention that helps. Why haven't we adopted this? There's
all those art centers that you mentioned at like the major research universities. Who's driving it? Is it the art community that's pushing to have medicine more incorporated more? Or is it medical professionals who are saying, we need to try other things because the tools that we have aren't kind of comprehensively working? Like which is leading which?
Yeah, it's both. And one that comes to mind, at Northwestern University, there's a Northwestern Music and Medicine initiative inside of the neurology department at the Feinberg School of Medicine. And they currently have, this is a neurologist that has a National Institutes of Health grant to do a study on how music impacts the brain for individuals with cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, dementia, and so on. And they are designing, it's called clinically designed improvisatory music. They are designing music to improve people's brain function with neurological challenges, right? So that is coming from the neurologist and the scientist, and obviously there's artists and musicians involved as well. It comes from all directions.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So are they participating in the music, or is this purely you're just listening to that?
Great question. So research looks at, among obviously many other things, participatory arts experiences, meaning you're playing music in this case, or receptive arts experiences. You're in the audience, right? You're receiving that arts experience rather than being an active experience or participating in the experience. In this specific example in Northwestern, it's receptive experience. Somebody is playing that music for you.
Okay, got it. And before we keep going on kind of social prescribing and what you all do with that, curious if you can kind of catch us all up on state of play right now in the pharmaceutical prescription state of the world, state of healthcare. Like, how did we get here where we have more rises and incidences of the diseases that many of these prescription drugs are designed to try to treat? And like, what's the landscape that you're seeing out there?
I think like whole PhDs are done on this, so I'm not sure that I can fully answer that question.
So stay tuned for a future episode of this podcast.
That's right. Yeah. Certainly thought about it. I would say on the demand side, so demand for mental health services, the rise of incidences of behavioral health needs, you've got, my view, and science would support this, a couple of things going on. Social media and our phones have been really bad for us. Been really, really bad for us. And, even, younger generations, we see, huge increases in incidences of suicidality and serious mental illness. So there's that challenge. The pandemic exacerbated that amongst young people and older adults. There's a real, about a year ago, the U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy kind of sounded the alarm bells on the loneliness epidemic in the United States.
Pack a day of cigarettes.
Yeah, 15 cigarettes a day. That's right. Yep. So, my view is that kind of the partisan political, divide, like is an issue that further exacerbates isolation and social disconnection. And until recently, and it's certainly not where it needs to be, but until recently, the U.S. healthcare system has not prioritized investing in addressing mental health and behavioral health until, it gets to a place where somebody has a serious mental illness. And, it's sort of like, what's primary care for mental health, right? Like primary care is like, we should all go see our primary care doctor every year, get that well checked, see like, is anything going on, right? You don't only show up to the doctor when you're sick, right? Because you want to prevent things from getting worse. But what's the version of primary care for mental health, right? So typically we only go seek mental health support or behavioral health support when we're in crisis, right? When there's a really difficult challenge. There are reasons for this. There are economic reasons for this in the US, different from, let's say, the UK, which is where social prescribing really emerged. There's a single national payer in the UK, right? So the same payer when you're 12, same insurance company when you're 12 is your same insurance company when you're 75.
Yeah.
So they have an incentive, that payer, the national health system, has an incentive to provide preventative care, because if you get sick, they're going to carry the bill
Sure.
down the road. When the U.S. healthcare system, where we have this, very complex, tangled web, and there are 1,000 different payers, and today I get my insurance from Blue Cross Blue Shield because that's where my wife's employer, sources their insurance. And in 2 years, somebody changes jobs, and then you end up with, a different health plan, a different insurance company. Then that, the incentive isn't the same, right? Why does the payer today want to provide access to preventative care that they may not capture the value on a couple of years down the road?
Yeah.
So, just misaligned incentives, I think, is part of the reason, short answer to your question.
I mean, when I see massive rises in the amount of antidepressants that we're prescribing, and then also massive rises in depression. And, we think about kids, massive rates of Ritalin and Adderall prescribed, but also like more ADHD than ever. It almost seems like these drugs that are being prescribed at scale are not solving the challenges and the challenges are actually getting worse. And so it seems like something fundamentally isn't working in the system. Is that a fair characterization? Is that wrong? Or are there just so many other factors that the drugs are trying to keep up? Like
I think the drugs are trying to, I think the drugs are trying to keep up. And this is not to defend the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, antidepressants, aren't preventative drugs, right? It's an intervention, right? So if we're trying to prevent disease, we need to think about what whole person health looks like. And Art Pharmacy, we're built on the biopsychosocial model, which is, very universally accepted, that, most diseases are biopsychosocial diseases, right?
Can you explain it for me?
Yeah. That's right. So bio, you think about sort of what's going on at the cellular level, right? Psycho, this is what's happening in your brain, and social, right? This is the social conditions. And the U.S. healthcare system is really built to address the bio and psycho components of care. It is not built to address the social leg of the stool. And, we know that people who are more socially connected, socially engaged, not lonely, right? Sure. Not isolated, are more likely to adhere or comply with, let's say, a diabetes care management plan, right? Versus people who are lonely are less likely to comply, right? So that's the kind of whole person health biopsychosocial model, is that we have to address kind of all three legs of the stool. And it's a complicated, like, what's the billing code for social connection?
Sure.
What's the billing code for purpose and confidence and self-esteem and self-efficacy? Like, there's no billing code for that, right? So the system is trying to learn, right? There is I would say most of the people that we work with, which may be a selective audience, but most of the people that we work with don't challenge this idea in healthcare. Don't challenge this idea that the kinds of interventions or kinds of care that Art Pharmacy provides people access to, they don't challenge the idea that it's important. Everyone agrees. It's just that our system isn't really built to pay for it, to know how it integrates. Does it happen through a healthcare pathway, or does it happen long before you show up to healthcare, right? By providing more funding for arts education in schools, for investing more in the social infrastructure of society.
Yeah, where are you all on that spectrum of preventative to somebody's had an acute event or an ongoing challenge, and this is meant to kind of address and correct a problem? Like, where does Art Pharmacy and the types of interventions fall?
we work across that continuum. We have preventative care programs and partners, and we work with people who have multiple chronic diseases that get prescribed Art Pharmacy because they've got a behavioral health diagnosis and and a chronic disease. I mean, it really varies. It's one of the things in some ways makes the work challenging.
Yeah, I was going to ask,
because
where's the sweet spot?
Yeah, when you show up and you say we're all things to everyone, like, that's not very helpful for a early stage business that's trying to, sort of get a foothold and find its niche. I believe that the place that we ought to be living, and I should say, we're working in all of across that continuum because we have demand across the continuum, right? But really the sweet spot for us, I think, is in working with primary care providers that is integrated into a healthcare pathway, but people need this before they're real sick.
Yeah.
I think the analog is 2024. Nobody listening to this podcast would say, I'm not sure if my health outcomes are connected to my physical activity level. Like, that's a silly thing to say in 2024. But 30 years ago, that was not true, right? 30 years ago, it was not universally understood that our physical activity impacted our health. And a company emerged called Silver Sneakers, which is a national network of Zumba classes and fitness programs and YMCAs, right? They build this national network of fitness programs and physical activity for seniors, for older adults. And they sort of have this hypothesis, if we can get older adults more physically active, we're going to decrease the likelihood that they end up in the emergency department, end up in the hospital, have chronic disease, et cetera. They look up, next thing you know, 7 years later, that's what the data says. They go to Medicare, and then Medicare starts making this program available to Medicare members. And certainly people would access it. People do access it that are sort of across this continuum. But let's intervene and make these types of activities an earlier stage intervention rather than a late stage intervention.
Yeah. How important, and you mentioned 30 years ago they didn't know that about physical activity. Now it's a bedrock. How important do you think arts interventions can be relative to something like physical activity? And then where are we on the curve? Is it going to be 30 years from now before this is commonly accepted? Are we right there? Like, what does the data say? What does your gut say and your anecdotal evidence say that the data is waiting to prove? Like, what's the horizon look like for this?
I think we're somewhere between 0 years and 30 years.
Okay.
The United Healthcare shared a story, shared a study just last month that dance is better for your health than exercise. Right? So you got the biggest healthcare institution in the world sharing studies that arts, right, dance, arts and culture activity are more effective than exercise.
Why did they say that? Not why, like the rationale why, but what about
dance? What is it?
Yeah.
What is about it? So, there's this field of neuroaesthetics. It's an amazing book, Your Brain on Art. Susan Mag-Salmon, who's at Johns Hopkins, Ivy Ross, who's at Google, wrote this book about a year ago, New York Times bestseller in 6 days, that really looks at like what aesthetic experience, arts, culture, creativity, architecture, space, design, how does it impact our brain? And there's no single thing, no single answer to say like, this is the right, from my view, no single answer, like this is the right art activity. In our matching and what we connect people to, our technology builds a profile on the patient based on their clinical needs, social needs, access barriers, demographics, experience and background, interest in the arts. And then on the other side of the equation, you have thousands and thousands of instances of an arts engagement, or arts activity. And the algorithm considers that member profile. It considers, the abundance of literature, research that's already out there. And then our own internal research. And that's what matches. And I would say that individual agency and choice is a really big part of it. So maybe research says that dance is really, really good for you if you've got Parkinson's, right? But if you don't want to dance and you're not going to get up and dance is not the thing for you, right? Sure. And I think that's one of the things that's so nice about this kind of treatment or care is that when you go get a prescription for an antidepressant, and I'm not here to say that people shouldn't have antidepressants. Lots and lots of people need to be on medication. Yeah. I don't see this as a like we're competing, with pharmaceuticals. But you go see your doctor, you've got a depression diagnosis, your doctor writes a prescription that says, hey, here are the 3 options for you of the SSRIs that are available, right? Oh, and maybe we can modulate the dose, the how many milligrams, right? Like the intensity. But the patient gets very little choice or very little agency in determining what kind of treatment, what kind of medication they want to get. Whereas in this model, there's tons of choice. There's tons of choice. The other thing that happens is your doctor writes a prescription for an antidepressant and they say, come see me in 6 months and let me know how it's working. Well, it takes, several weeks for it to build up in your system and to potentially, be efficacious. There are side effects. Well, the doctor doesn't learn that for months of whether or not it's working. So the like feedback loop on it from, by your healthcare for your healthcare provider is not a very tight feedback loop. Yeah. And as a result, you get adherence to SSRIs in the low 40%, it's 41, 42%. Most people aren't staying on the treatment.
People drop off their own SSRIs.
People drop off their own SSRIs because they say there's side effects or it's not working. There's other reasons there aren't medication adherence. But what if there was a quicker way to sort of get a feedback loop of, is this working, right? And so I think it's one of the things that participation in these types of activities do is that it's a much quicker feedback loop. I enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy it. I felt better. I didn't feel better. Yeah.
And so y'all are effectively running a marketplace business, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but where, a health system or other payer then is literally prescribing someone to go to an arts and culture intervention. And then how are you finding those arts and culture interventions? And like how you said thousands, like how broad is that? And does someone have to sign up for your network? Or, I'm picturing like ClassPass for different arts, only your insurance company pays for it. Like, how does it work?
Yeah, we go build networks of these arts and culture partners that range from your large cultural institutions to small grassroots community organizations.
So you all are finding them?
We build that network. That's correct. Individual teaching artists, it really ranges. They all have to meet a standard of care. They get vetted, to come on to our system. It's the marketplace piece of it. I think it's marketplace-ish, but we're really managing the member journey throughout all that. It's very high touch. It's not just you show up to artpharmacy.co, say, this is what I like. There's something on the other side of the system, right? It is a managed process.
Yeah. Okay. And then how have you prioritized where to go, right? So like, I imagine there's all different arts and culture verticals. There's all different types of patients and people. There's different geographies in the country. Like you saturate a market versus go nationwide. Like how have you navigated that?
We're a business is less than 2 years old, and we're asking literally today this question of sort of depth versus breadth at this stage. And is it best for us to pursue, let's say go after one segment of the payer market? This could be Medicaid managed care. And if you're going to go after Medicaid managed care, maybe we want breadth. Or if we're going to say we're going to be focused geographically and we want every payer within just a couple of markets, you could build equally sized businesses doing that. We're still, I think that the government sponsored health plans, Medicaid, Medicare, dual eligible Medicaid, Medicare plans, is a great place for us to be. But it's still early. And as I shared a moment ago, we're getting, we get colleges and universities that call us. We get integrated health systems that call us. We get capitated provider groups that call us. In addition to the, Medicaid plans that we work with. So, we're still learning like what the sweet spot is, and, thus, have, not yet made a choice on breadth versus depth. But maybe that time is coming for us to start making some choices.
Got it. And did you have a tipping point, or like, what was the moment, we're talking early pandemic, you're starting to look into this, you're starting to learn about it. There seems to be a mismatch where data and anecdotes would suggest that arts interventions are really helpful for health outcomes, but yet the U.S. healthcare system not built and incentivized to provide it. When did you go from that insight to like, there's a company here worth starting and worth giving this phase of my life to? Like, what got you over that hump?
Yeah. It's never a super straight line. But I'll share a couple of things that led to that tipping point. Seeing the supply demand, like the disequilibrium in the mental health industry, take arts out of the equation. There is way more demand for mental health services than there are available mental health services. Nobody needs to be convinced of that. None of our customers, that is a major part of the pain that our customers experience, from universities to health plans. That is a serious issue. And so, you start pulling on this thread and you see, okay, there's a market opportunity. There's a problem that we want to solve. There's, because of my professional background and career, I know that there's just like all this excess supply of arts interventions that are not being used. Well, if we could think about those arts interventions as mental health interventions, then there's just like latent supply in the mental health space that's not being tapped into. So, that was sort of a, coming to that realization, was part of the tipping point. And then on the just more personal side, you get friends, advisors, mentors that say, there's a there, you should go explore this. Customer discovery is, like a big part of it. You go talk to doctors, you go talk to health plans, you go talk to arts and culture partners, and understand, because for this to work, you got to get 4 stakeholders to all say yes at the same time. To the same thing.
Yeah. Who are the buyers?
Yeah. Most importantly, you got to get the patient, right? Mm-hmm. The individual say, yeah, I want to do this. Then you got to get the doctor say, yeah, I want to prescribe this. Then you got to get the arts partner say, yeah, I want that patient to participate in the activity that I have. And then you got to have a third party payer, an insurance company or whoever it is, say, yeah, we want to pay for this.
Which has been hardest? Which has been easiest of those? Or what are the dynamics there?
Yeah. I think one surprise for me was, we were like, this question of, can we get doctors to prescribe art? Yeah. And the surprise is you go talk to doctors and say, hey, we got this idea. What do you think? Say, oh yeah. Already do that informally, right? Already encourage my patients, especially in a primary care setting, be more engaged, be more active, get involved in clubs, for older adults, have your children pick you up and take you to the theater Friday night. Like they're already encouraging people to do these kinds of things. They may or may not know the science of it, but they're attuned to this. Like we're not bringing them a new idea. And I think that's the other thing that's like really, really important in all of this is to acknowledge artists have been healers since the beginning of humankind, right? The idea that art is medicine is not novel, right? Doctors have been doing community referral, formally, informally, for a really long time. The two are just ill-equipped to work together. There's exceptions, but those two, fields are ill-equipped to work together, and that's all art pharmacy is trying to be. Is the sort of wiring, the guts, the infrastructure amongst those stakeholders.
And is something like you just said, like a directive to pick your elderly mom up and take her to the theater? Like, is that like something you all would provide, or like what's kind of in the sweet spot? What's on limits? What's off limits? Like that fits within arts and culture?
Yeah, that's very much in the sweet spot.
And so then a health provider is paying for tickets or transportation. And is it once a week? Is it once a month? Like how do we actually get to
the standard care plan is 12 doses of arts and culture over a 12-month period. So it's roughly every 4 weeks. There's lots of variations to that, but that's kind of the standard. And so when you go see your doctor, the doctor writes the script. Doesn't have to be a doctor, healthcare provider. Writes the prescription for 12 doses of arts and culture over a 12-month period. Yeah. They call that prescription into us. The doctor isn't saying to the patient, hey, patient, you're going to the theater, you're going to the dance class, you're going to the museum, you're going to the community arts studio. That's what the patient, art pharmacies, care navigators, and the technology are figuring out together.
Sure.
But it's across artistic discipline, music, dance, theater, visual arts, creative writing, or sort of cultural experiences. It's mostly in-person activities, by mostly like 90+%, but there are virtual engagements available for people that are homebound or otherwise can't be out in the community. As I was sharing earlier, receptive and participatory experiences, individual experiences, group experiences. You got to have sort of that really, broad and expansive database of offerings to get to a highly personalized set of recommendations.
Yeah. Who is it for and who is it not for? Because there's kind of like two voices in my head. One's like, man, this is awesome. Everyone should have access. And to your point on preventative care, it'd probably be a better landscape if everyone were doing something like that. On the other hand, it's easy for me to be like, well, if someone's having a really tough time, like, is 12 like paint and sips over the course of 12 months like really gonna move the needle, or is that just like a drop in the bucket? So like, is that enough to advance someone's well-being materially, or does it require other things to happen at the same time? Like, who's this for? Who's it not for?
Unsatisfactory answer is it depends. So longitudinal study, 8,500 participants, Dr. Daisy Fancourt, University College London, 2019, 2020, says that sustained ongoing engagements in the arts, regardless of what the activity is, and I think it's important to get smart about what the activity is, but regardless of what the activity is, going a few times a year, just a few times a year, reduces isolation and loneliness, boosts social connection and emotional well-being, right? So, to answer the question of like, who's it for, or who's it not for? We say this to our healthcare partners. Art pharmacy is not for individual with unmanaged serious mental illness. So if somebody is, actively experiencing psychosis, schizophrenia, and it is unmanaged, they are not in the care of a healthcare provider, art pharmacy is not appropriate for that person. But for someone who, we work with a lot of people who have serious mental illness, that are, under the supervision of a healthcare provider, right? That this is a helpful addition, right? Complement to their care plan.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I took us on a bit of a side road. We were talking about you need the patient to say yes, you need the doctor to say yes. You obviously need the arts provider, and then you need the healthcare system. I would imagine my incoming thought would be where the money is, the rest follow, and that's going to be the hardest. Is that true?
I think that's generally true. Yeah. And because, you need, at the health plan, at the payer level, you've got a clinical buyer and an economic buyer. Clinical buyers, are rigorous in their investigation and evaluation. And they, also, are not, they mostly want to make this available to their members of the health plan. Economic buyer, the data is not, there's just not enough data there yet. So a lot of the research that I cited earlier, the research has really been on the clinical efficacy, right? It's not been on the economic efficacy. So the economic buyer is going to make a decision based on one of two things. Either it's going to generate more revenue, attract new members to our health plan, or it's going to reduce cost of care. Now, there are other reasons to make economic decisions. regulatory reasons, compliance, et cetera. But I think, when we want to, as we're thinking about sort of what this looks like at scale, really it needs to reduce total cost of care, which means reducing emergency department visits, overutilization of healthcare services, increase primary care visits, decrease, hospital visits, right? Improve compliance, medication adherence, compliance with chronic disease. And we have preliminary data, we have good data, but there's not a large body of evidence out there that shows that this saves money.
Like burden of proof that you have to show, and what are you all like trying to show from a data and outcomes perspective? Is that all on you all? Are you partnered with anybody who's kind of running the clinical evaluation element of that? Like, how does that work for you to be able to like, hey, incontrovertibly, this is a yes?
Yeah, there are. So we get data from our healthcare partners. We're very serious about measuring the efficacy of our pharmacy. We use standard validated behavioral health assessments, PHQ, GAD, UCLA Loneliness Scale. These are what everyone else uses. So on the clinical side, those are important things. And then on the economic side, it's not our data, it's the health plan's data, right? It's the payer, the health system's data. And I think that's one of the things that's really important is that typically, these types of programs and activities that have been around for a long time, like this idea of integrating the arts, using the arts as a health and wellness sort of tool or intervention. Like I was saying earlier, that's not novel, but historically it hasn't happened in partnership with health plans. And therefore you're not getting the health plan's data, and therefore they're not convinced because they're only convinced by their own data. They're not convinced by someone else's data.
Sure. What have you learned and experienced trying to make that sale?
It is long and slow. It is long and slow. Because, I think a lot of people would say, oh, this is kind of soft and squishy, like the arts, not really sure. It's just a actuary that's, on the health economic side that's, making these kinds of decisions or recommendations on whether or not to buy. I've learned, and like, this is probably very obvious to folks. Don't create a solution and then go find a problem. Find a problem and then build a solution. And so we try to go into conversations with our health plan partners to understand what problems they are trying to solve. Yeah. Are they trying to solve time to care and network adequacy problems for their health plan? Like, that is one problem to solve. Are they trying to solve overutilization of the emergency department? Are they trying to solve a compliance to diabetes, management? Like, these are all different problems that require different interventions.
Are you hearing all of this?
Oh yeah. All the time.
Yeah. And did you come to that learning, don't take the solution in search of the problem, search for the problem? Were you on the wrong side of that? And then what have you, what was the unlock, or when was the first time it was like, wait, okay, this is a problem, different way to think about it. Here's how our pharmacy could be a solution. Yeah.
I think what I've learned is like our pharmacy is, we've got this kind of foundational platform model, but we need not show up and say, here's how our solution is going to work for you. Say, we've got a platform, we've got a model, we've got a lot of capacity. Here are the kinds of problems that we have, we're helping our other customers and partners solve. Where do you think this might work, right? What problems do you have? It's like any sales process. You try to understand the pain points that your customers may have before you get on the phone with them. And,
you mentioned we're 2 years in and we're trying to make that sale, trying to grow. Where is the company now? Where are you relative to maybe where you expected to be 2 years in? What season are you all in right now?
We are, we're growing. We're expanding to new states. We have 2 more states that will roll out in 2020, in the Q4 of 2024. So we're definitely in a growth period. we're trying to solve for, back to something you said earlier about kind of where's the challenge, the bottleneck, the payers. We're trying to solve for a problem right now that we're getting a ton of demand from health systems and providers, like every day. A doctor, a therapist, a health system calls us and says, can we make this available to our patients, right? So we're trying to figure out how to solve for that. Like we don't want to turn away demand, but we don't yet have the right mechanism to capture that demand. And we're still, we're still learning, but it's definitely a growth period for us. We're hiring a couple of new folks right now, and we're having a ton of fun and learning every day. I mean, I would say that the business is, like we haven't pivoted, since we launched a couple of years ago. The business is more or less what I thought the business would be. But geez, do I learn new things every day that we must do in order to be successful both today and in the future.
What's an example of that?
The healthcare is very local. It's very, very local. And we have got to figure out a way to have a presence in the communities where we're working, even though we're headquartered in Atlanta. It's a remote, business. I mean, it's sort of a virtually operating business. The activities that people participate in is they go see their doctor in person, they go to the theater in person, but the intermediary, art pharmacy, is remote, right? Like we're not there with them. And people, I think in healthcare and then that work in, community organizations, there's a sense of like local belonging that really matters, and a perception that, well, you're calling in from halfway across the country. You probably don't know the local context of my community. Like every customer that we have thinks that they're unique and different,
sure.
And in many ways they are. And so that is a constant learning and something that we're actively trying to figure out how to solve for right now.
Yeah, totally. And I was even curious, like who it's for and who it's not for, even from like an economic lens. Like, is this only for folks who don't have as much money? Because a question I would have, or a story I would have, is like, yes, going back to the theater, like you should just go, but your doctor shouldn't have to pay for that, or your provider shouldn't, or your healthcare company shouldn't have to pay for that. Like you should just go to the theater. Like, and I've heard that with medically tailored meals, there's just a question of who should shop for you. How will that part of the game play out?
Yeah, well, so I'll say a couple of things about that. So should your health plan not pay for your gym membership because you're healthy and because you can afford it? Like if your gym membership and you utilize it keeps you healthy, then yeah, your health plan should pay for your gym membership, right? I mean, that's my view, regardless of your economic status. Most of these activities and engagements that Art Pharmacy makes available to people or facilitates connection to are already available to people, right? Like you don't need Art Pharmacy to go to the museum and they've got free Art Friday, or, Saturday afternoon is, funded by, a lot of these places are free and open to the public, right? Not all of them, not most of them, but many across the country. And so it's not always an economic barrier for people. A lot of times people don't know that it exists. A lot of times people don't have permission to prioritize their mental health and well-being. A lot of times, very often, there is stigma. I think we've improved as a society, but there's still a lot of stigma around mental health. And people don't want to be on meds because of the stigma. People don't want to be in therapy because of the stigma. Again, improving, but not where it needs to be. Well, there's not quite as much stigma around going to the theater or the dance class or whatever, even if it's a mental health intervention. So one of our partners is Stanford University, where every single student on the Stanford campus has access to art pharmacy as a student mental health benefit, wellness benefit. Well, the challenge at Stanford is not, can Stanford students afford to participate in these activities, which, by the way, the university already makes most of them available at no cost or deeply discounted to students. One of the challenges at Stanford is, think about who's at Stanford: high performing, like high achievers that, everyone's type A. And, I'm not permitted to prioritize my mental health because I need to be in the library studying.
Yeah.
Well, if the athletic department or your student services coordinator or student health services or somebody in your student housing that's responsible for student well-being writes a prescription for arts participation, again, this thing that you can afford and is already made available to you, writes a prescription for arts participation that says, hey, maybe you ought to prioritize your mental health and well-being. That's removing a different kind of access barrier. So sure, we work with people in federally qualified community health clinics on Medicaid plans where their cost is one of the major barriers. But there are other barriers for people to participate and address their mental health
it's
as well.
Validation that it can rise to that level of priority for you.
That's right. It's the power of the prescription pad.
Yeah. Yeah. Also wild to think about in a collegiate setting, the social isolation or some of the challenges that might lead to the need for something like art pharmacy without it being able to be readily addressed. Because like you said, there's free or deeply discounted options available to those students. And actually it just really speaks to the depth of the challenge. That you can be, under so much pressure and psychosis for trying to attain what students at Stanford are trying to attain, that even in an environment that's so rich with connection and options, you still feel the need. So that speaks to me for sure. And so going back to, the journey that you all are on as a company, how'd you guys fund?
We're funded through, customers, right? Our customers pay us. And we raised some venture capital late last year.
How did you navigate that decision of deciding the funding structure, whether to take VC money, like what that would look like?
We thought a lot about whether or not to raise money, and essentially needed to, right? If I could go, I would say to any founder or anyone who's thinking about building a business, if you can go get debt without having to risk your house and your personal assets and all this sort of stuff, if you can go get debt. It's way cheaper, right, than venture money. Way cheaper than venture money. But no bank is, without me putting up a house, which isn't an option, is going to at day zero is going to finance a business that is thinking that it's going to get U.S. health insurance companies to pay for arts prescriptions, right? And this is the role that venture plays. One of the roles that venture plays is, makes big bets on big ideas that potentially have a big impact.
Yeah. And how does that change, or how does that structure impact how you think about the horizon of the business? Do you have 5 years to figure this out? Do you have less time? What's the clock and what's the nature of the game?
We've got some time, and our lead investor is incredible, and they certainly want to see a return. But we get on a call every month, and the first question that he asks me every month is, how can I help? Not, show me the numbers. I still have to show them the numbers. But they know that we're in this relationship for a long time, that the time horizon to U.S. healthcare really adopting arts prescriptions is not tomorrow. And I think everybody is both patient and feverishly working to make it happen.
Yeah. And you're now in the relatively unique seat, I would imagine, of somebody who started and led a nonprofit for a long time and then has transitioned to running a venture-backed company. I also know you're getting ready to graduate from an extended MBA program. What has that transition been like, and how is it similar or different running a VC-backed company compared to running a nonprofit?
Lots of differences and lots of similarities. I mean, I think, nonprofit's a business, still have to pay the bills. In some ways it's harder, I think, to run a nonprofit, which I did for 15 years. One of the differences, I think, is the accountability. It may sound different. I mean, it's sort of unexpected, but it's certainly been unexpected for me. The accountability in the private sector, or with the accountability in the private sector is greater than in a nonprofit, at least from my experience. That's not in any way to criticize the role that nonprofits play. I'm, lifelong nonprofiteer. I believe deeply in the role of nonprofits in our community. But you get a grant from a foundation or a public agency to deliver services to 500 people in a nonprofit, and you only end up delivering services to 300 people because of lots of good reasons that were barriers to doing what you wrote into that grant proposal. There's as there should be, lots of understanding of maybe why you didn't deliver on what you wrote into that grant proposal. You sign a contract with a customer that says we'll deliver services to 500 people, and they pay you for delivering those 500 services, and you only deliver services to 300 people. You're not getting a second contract, and they may say, give us the money back for the 200 people that didn't get the services. Yeah. And so there is I would say for me, sort of there's a sharpness in a positive way, with a greater degree of accountability that let's only deliver, or let's only promise what we can know we can deliver on. Whereas, I think in the nonprofit environment, you're like making big bets. You're making, you're hoping that you can make a big impact. And unfortunately, nonprofits are typically the entities that are asked to step in and solve the biggest problems in society, and are woefully underfunded to do so. And so you're just sort of setting up a situation where nonprofits are rarely going to be able to fulfill their sort of mission, right? Or their, the intention, because they're dealing with just intractable problems in our society, and not nearly enough resources to do it.
How are you approaching wellness given the path that you're on? Which, I mean, I know that it can be intense running any kind of startup, certainly a venture-backed startup, doesn't always seem to lend itself to long nights of sleep, peak mental stability. How's that going? And
so I've just finished a 2-year MBA program where I've been traveling out of state every other weekend for 3 days for the last 2 years. I have a 3-year-old and 4-year-old at home. I have a lot on my plate. Exercise is really, really important to me. Running, very important to my mental health. I'm not great, but pretty good about shutting off work after a certain hour. Like I have done it before. I mean, I nonprofit that I built and ran for a long time, like, writing grants at 2 a.m, not occasionally, regularly, right? That I'm working, 15, 18 hour days. And I was not as effective of a leader because I was not caring for my own mental health and well-being. I didn't have the kind of balance in life that was needed. And so like balance is important. Exercise is important. Time with friends and social connection is important. I think setting a good example for our team is important so that they are all prioritizing taking care of their own mental health and well-being is important.
What gives, like what's on the right on the fringe that feels like the challenge point, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah. One of the things that is so good for me and that I just love doing, and I always feel better when I do it, is with my wife, host friends at our home and have dinner parties and, not big, just host people at our home. Yeah. And we don't do enough of that. I don't do enough of that. I shouldn't put that on Annie. I don't do enough of that. Yeah. Yeah. And I think like, maybe the other thing that I'll mention is nature. Nature, hiking, backpacking, really good for me. I mean, you talk about social prescriptions. I mean, there's a whole field of nature prescribing. We'll be talking about arts prescriptions, but nature prescribing is a part of the social prescribing field. And I wish I spent more time in nature. Yeah. I never regret when I am outside in nature.
Yeah.
And with the busyness of my schedule right now, particularly my travel schedule on the weekends, being in nature has been a challenge.
Yeah. Atlanta's a little tough for that too. I mean, to your point, like a trail run with friends for me is probably like you're checking all the non-family boxes that I want to check.
Exercise, nature, connection.
Yeah. But then when you think about like already having time impingement, and then it's like, all right, am I going to drive 30 or 40 minutes on top of a run? Like it just doesn't happen nearly as much as I wish that it did.
Yeah.
Which is why we should take 75, 85 and make it a river.
Sounds great. Yeah. Sign me up.
Instead of just capping it.
Donate $100 to that.
Yeah. One thing that I'd like to ask, and the whole conversation here kind of touches on it, is what's a habit that you see modern folks having, or us having in modern culture, that you think is maybe underserving us, and what would you shift that habit to be? And specifically here, I'm kind of wondering, if we're saying more arts interventions, more time in arts and culture, what's the right level that somebody should be thinking about that? And then also, is there something that you see us doing, whether it's yourself or, peers, family members, that you should think, all right, we gotta take that off the plate or scale it back?
Go to one cultural activity a month. Just go to one a month. And by that, I don't mean by saying go to one cultural activity, I don't mean you have got to go to the symphony or the ballet every month. I mean, like, go to a local festival, go to a concert, go to a painting class, take your kids to theater for the very young at the Alliance Theater. Like, there's so much great stuff to do. There's in Atlanta in particular. I mean, Atlanta is just rich with amazing cultural experiences. Once a month would be my encouragement to people.
I like that. It's a reachable bar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are we doing that's not serving us? We're on our phones too much. Put technology down. Get off social media. Like, I mean, that's nothing. I'm not saying anything novel or groundbreaking there. Like,
Are you on social media?
Nope. I'm not.
Yeah. How does that impact your ability to lead the business, or does it?
Well, I should clarify. And actually, Annie, my wife, and I, we argue about this. She says that LinkedIn is social media. I do not think of LinkedIn as social media.
Probably depends how you use it.
Yeah. So because I am on LinkedIn. I don't, your question of does, my not being on social media impact, the business? I think probably in a positive way. I think it's mostly social media is a distraction. I don't think it's good for us.
Yeah.
Not saying that there aren't benefits, to it and ways to get exposure and connect with people and all that sort of stuff. But, over the last 20 years, the rise of social media, we have seen an increasingly less social connection. Like I think that there is a relationship between those two things.
How do you get news, current events? What's your...
Yeah, it's wild to me. I mean, again, as somebody like who's never had social media, why aren't we're getting news from social media, and I realize that's how most people get their news, but so I probably sound like a 100-year-old person. I read the newspaper to get news. I read the local newspaper every day. I read a couple of national newspapers every day. And then, there's good blogs and newsletters to follow along to, depending on one's interests.
Yeah. I'm trying to find that balance now. I've been off Twitter/X. Can't get used to saying that for a little bit. And then it's like, oh, it's hard to follow the Tar Heels when I'm not following them. So it's like, got to build the habit.
I was one of my professors from this class. This was just about a month ago. Who's a former CEO of a $12 billion Fortune 500 company, now sort of in, retirement, is doing leadership, training. And he, I'm going to get the timeline wrong, but, it was like 25 years ago, he said, no more sports, not watching sports anymore. And I think he loves sports. Like I'm not, I love sports. Like I love baseball. I think that playing and participating in sports is really good for people. I think that the camaraderie and sense of community and belonging that results from, being a spectator is really good for people. But like, how much time would we get back if we weren't watching football all day long on Sunday or all day long on Saturday or basketball? I mean, we give a lot of time to this, and then everybody's running around saying, I don't have time to do things,
Not watching sports during the pandemic, when then live sports came back, it was like the first time that I had seen a commercial in 9 months, a year, whatever it was. And it was like, wait a second, I don't have 3 minutes to sit through this nonsense. And it was crazy. I don't think I've watched much live that wasn't recorded so I could fast forward since, because you just like realize how much time you're spending. Does sports fit into arts and culture? Like, is going to an Atlanta Hawks game, does this count?
Yeah, it does not fit into our model right now. I mean, I see a day.
What about outside of art? Well, actually, I'll interrupt you.
That's what I was saying. I mean, I think that like social prescribing at large, art prescriptions, nature prescriptions, volunteer prescriptions, food prescriptions, exercise prescriptions, sports prescriptions, right? I mean, social prescribing is the practice of healthcare providers prescribing non-clinical interventions, right? Yeah. That's what social prescribing is. If I've had more than one person sort of say, or are you saying that we're going to be paying for people's tickets to the Taylor Swift concert?
No, they're very expensive.
Here's what I would say to that. They are very expensive, but if they prevent that person from going in the emergency department, what do you care if it's Taylor Swift?
Yeah.
Right. So like, if paying for, if your health plan paid for your Hawks tickets and it improved your health outcomes and reduced your utilization of the healthcare system, what do you care if they're paying for Hawks tickets, right? I mean, I'm being somewhat, glib in saying that, but I think it's, the premise of the question is one that ought to be considered.
Resources that you would encourage folks to check out. So you said your brain on art earlier. Are there other either like books, talks, other resources?
Yes.
If anyone's interested?
Your Brain on Art. Read it. Just yesterday, which Tuesday, June 11th, a book published by Simon & Schuster by Jules Hotz called The Connection Cure is a book on the social prescribing movement. Just came out yesterday. Everybody buy that. Jules is great. Maybe the other that I will mention is Dr. Benjamin Miller. He's got a great Substack. Ben lives in Chattanooga, renowned behavioral health leader that thinks a lot about how we ought to be providing more mental health care within the community, and that like you and me are a part of the mental health infrastructure. That our family, our friends, our barbers, our sports coaches, that we need to better equip and train the public to be a part of the mental health web of support. And Ben's a great guy too.
Seems like the opposite of like bowling alone.
That's right.
Is that we're all in it together, need each other, need to be around each other. Anything else that you would want folks listening to this to either visit or learn about, ways that they can support you, Art Pharmacy? We want more partners. We want more collaborators. We want more co-conspirators. Go to artpharmacy.co. Easy to find out how to get involved and sign up there as a partner, or just somebody who wants to follow along in our work, help make connections. But I guess maybe the most important thing that I would say is like, be nice to folks. You never know what they're going through. People have all sorts of hidden struggles, and just be nice. Doesn't take much. Totally. And if you're listening to this and you happen to be the CEO of a large healthcare system, call Chris.
That would be great too.
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me, Brent.
That's our show for today. Thank you, Chris. Makes me pleased about getting out there and going to concerts and other arts and culture things. I'm giving myself credit for all of that as a way to combat loneliness and be active in the community. And please do the same for all of you. Anybody listening, just remember that getting out there and being around the good things happening in the arts and in culture and with your family and with your friends and community, you're nourishing yourself. So thanks for the time. Appreciate all of y'all. You're doing great out there. Let me know if you got any questions, ideas, want to recommend a guest to come on a future episode, or anything else on your mind. I'm open to it. So thank you very much. You're doing great out there. Have a great rest of your week and weekend. Talk to you soon. Thank you.